growing up in a family of business owners, what is it that contributed that worked out well? And maybe how did that same thing showed up as a barrier or as a drawback?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. As a kid, no one was even close to technology. In fact, like I didn't really get to see people lead, if that makes sense. My dad, a little bit. So a little bit of backstory is like his business was a fishing business. So I grew up on a fishing boat, and the positives of that were that he seemed like he was his own person, and I gravitated towards being my own person, which we all know is, especially at least in my line of business now, you're never quite your own person. You got to help a lot of other people out, but like the negatives were just sort of the stress cycles of it. So I also saw him have his boat go on the beach, and I watched my 40-year-old father, and I'm 10 years old or something at the time. I watched him like break down crying because his boat, his livelihood was like on the beach and he couldn't get it off the beach. So I saw the stress of it, and there was definitely like the highs and lows of money coming in and out the door. And so that negative could be a positive, right? I was always worried about, well, I got to make enough money to not have like that problem. So yeah, you get front row seat of a lot of things. And I think if your parents aren't doing that, you just have a steadiness, right? It's a steady paycheck, budget your life to your paycheck. Entrepreneurship, owning businesses is definitely a boom bust cycle. You go up, you go down. It just depends on it's going. You can see all of it as a kid.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that I can relate to that because I have seen my father going through multiple businesses myself, and I started my own business, but I can quickly see that how different it is to see somebody versus going through that to yourself. So can
Yep.
you share how was it going through those ups and downs yourself, even though you have been a witness to your father's journey? How different was it?
I think there's definitely like that line that you cross over, right? I think when you get started in your own business, some people just look like they know what they're doing when they're starting their businesses.
Mhm.
And if they've been on it 2 or 3 times, maybe they do. But when you're starting your first business, it's a really unique time. You only get to do that once. And you're definitely making it up the whole time. And so I have a pretty strong meditation practice in my life. So a lot of like reflection and just like really focusing on self-awareness. And I knew that about myself. I knew that I was faking it. You could call it imposter syndrome, call it whatever you want, right? But I just felt that it was exhausting to have to keep making it up at a certain point. And so I'd relinquished control of the CEO title and role, only to find myself back in the seat several years later, because that's just what happened. That happened to be Opal's journey. But the second time around, I knew I was ready for it in a totally different way. And it wasn't starting a business, but it was starting the CEO role back up. And I think that just going through stuff makes that next step easier. And I think there's no substitute for experience. And I think that most people are good at faking. They can fake their way all the way to duping investors for millions and millions of dollars, as we've seen like in the news and whatnot. But I think that I can't quite put my finger on what it would be, but it's that feeling that you know what you're doing. There's always unknowns, but you feel confident in your ability to react to what comes at you versus, I think when I was younger, I felt like I needed to know everything. And because I didn't, I was faking it, and that was making me exhausted. So maybe it was imposter syndrome. It was an interesting time for sure. Like journey going through that and seeing that difference.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think what you're referring to is knowing something in your skin versus knowing something from knowledge or from figuring out plan A, plan B,
Right.
and plan C, and so on. And I think that's powerful, right? Because if you can lead without knowing everything and especially in these times where uncertainty has never been greater, I think that must be a tremendous advantage.